Ave Maria.
This is Father Allen.
And I'm Jonathan Hill.
Radio Cor Mariae is preempting the regular EWTN programming at this hour on Election Day 2019 to bring you the first episode of our new program, Catholic Citizenship.
A program designed to help listeners understand our obligations as Catholics to faithfully fulfill our civic duties.
Our regular programming will resume after this broadcast. Welcome to Catholic Citizenship. I'm Father Allen Bernardine Maria, and
I'm Jonathan Hill.
We are the co-hosts of this show, a new show to Radio Cor Mariae, and we'd like to introduce to you what it is. So, Jonathan, can you encapsulate the sense of what our program Catholic Citizenship is about?
Well, we're basically about giving people a lifeline and understanding basic issues that have been neglected in the media or sometimes in the catechesis of the church at the parish level, perhaps. But we're about throwing a lifeline to help people understand issues better so that they can be better Catholic citizens.
Exactly.
And corruption in the society is increasing to dangerous levels. We can see that all around us. And the reason is partly because of materialistic values that are generally the result of the absence of a strong prayer life, but also an ignorance of key issues and ideas that relate to a well-ordered personal life. And these issues include the natural law, the Church's teaching, the U.S. Constitution. So by shedding light on these issues and other themes that are key to Catholic citizenship in these times, we intend to enable Catholic citizens to perform the role that God has called them to, basically to public witness. And it's this witness that can spark a renewal and a restoration. And that's what we hope to do. It's a very dark world, but we have to start somewhere, and small effort can grow into something very powerful. And despair is not ever in the lexicon of a Christian citizen. And that's it's incompatible with Christian faith, and there's absolutely no reason to despair. Christ was resurrected, and there's historical evidence of that, and we should not doubt it. 11 out of 12 apostles were martyred, and they didn't allow themselves to be martyred for testimony that they made up. So he was resurrected, and he is God, and he did establish a church during the time of the apostles, and he is with us in the sacraments and in the Blessed Sacrament, and we need to be bolstered by those facts and go from there.
Very good. Well, as you say, we're starting out very small. This is the first episode, and neither of us are professionals in radio or communications. We've had a little bit of experience, and we have this great opportunity to be able to record in a very nice recording studio, and we have some good help with us, various volunteers. So we're starting off very humbly, but with an idea that I believe could really blossom into a movement, and there is a bit of a movement, and we see as times grow more difficult, people rise to the challenge. As St. Paul said, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And so now is a time for people of faith to really waken up to the fact that their faith is the key to bringing light into the dark situation that we're in. And so let me try to explain to listeners how this show is envisioned. Okay. Now, in conversations leading up to the development of this program, we identified some key themes or principles. Really, what they are, I think, are principles that, if understood properly and applied to real situations, can lead to conclusions, to policies that are better than the ones we have right now. And so some of those pillars are natural law, and Christian morality is largely a derivative of natural law. It's just expressed also in divine revelation. So natural law being the fruit of reason and observation of how nature is ordered, and we know that the order was given by a creator who fashioned the universe according to his vision. And so through reason, we discern what is the natural law, what is this order that God has created for, in particular, man and his behavior. What is it that man is designed for? How is he supposed to live? And we'll go into that. And then the Constitution of the United States, being a document that was very well thought out and is the blueprint for our nation, and in some ways the country is getting away from the founding principles, and we see a lot of problems. Really, there hasn't been a nation in modern times that is doing better or has a better constitution than the United States Constitution, at least for the kind of government we have. We're not a monarchy. We're not a complete anarchy. We're a democracy, and there need to be very well thought out rules when you have that form of government, which may not be the ideal, but it's what we have. And then, of course, there's the church, which you referred to and put very nicely in referring to the resurrection, which really is our hope of a life without misery, without suffering and sadness, which can only come in the next life, in the transcendent view of man, because God made man immortal. So we do have the church also, which has been instituted by Jesus Christ, who rose from the dead, which is founded on the witness of the apostles, who received the teaching, who have transmitted the mind of Christ through their successors to our time. And so we have the magisterium of the church as well as a bulwark of right thinking, enlightened by the truth of the divine revelation. And so these are the three major principles. And then in our program, we hope to also include certain regular features. I'm a Franciscan Friar of the Immaculate, and we're recording in a studio here in a friary in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And so it's very fitting that we also bring into our thinking some of the values that are particular to our institute. They're not particular to our institute in the sense that only the Franciscans of the Immaculate think this way, but we've been given a charism, which is that of total consecration to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And so that's another aspect that we can offer. It may be a new concept to some of our listeners, and some of our listeners may not be Catholic, and we welcome everyone of good faith to hear what it is we have to present. And we believe if we are true to the faith that we've been given and can articulate it, then people will begin to see that Catholicism isn't maybe as strange as they've been perhaps led to think. So the doctrine on Mary and her mediation, which is a fundamental Catholic principle, is something that may be new for some listeners, but we want to bring in that light as well. So maybe we should summarize again what our program is and then go on to some of the discussion that we want to hit in this first episode.
Okay, so basically we want to talk about these three pillars and how they relate to the life of the Catholic citizen. And this program is not just about advancing certain public policies, though. It's about also the Catholic citizen living his life within the public sphere as he should. And that can involve all sorts of activities, with the raising of children, through homeschooling, various things. It doesn't necessarily have to involve public policy, government policy. But the three pillars that underline much of our outlook are the natural law, without which people tend to go in if we reject that natural law, people tend to go in a direction which is self-destructive, and the same is true for societies, and that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing that with the homosexuality, the LGBT movement, the prevalence of artificial contraception, abortion, opposition to the right to bear arms, and the failure to respect subsidiarity, which is a facet of the natural law. And also we're seeing it in the government's present coercive health insurance regime, which is at odds with subsidiarity. And basically, all of these things, they are leaving human wreckage in their wake or unduly increasing the burdens of the individual and the greater community. So once we go away from these principles, we make life more difficult. And that's what's happening. And because people don't understand these principles, they don't realize what's happening. So it's very urgent that we talk about the natural law. In addition to that, to the Church's teachings, and that we help people to understand the basis for the Church's teaching authority. There's basically three problems with the acceptance of the Church's teaching. It's unbelief, it's ignorance of the Magisterium and the Church's disciplinary authority, and then failure to pray and benefit from the Church's sacramental grace. So all those things are important. So if we're going to advance society in a Christian way, then we need to help to alleviate some of those problems. But in addition, the Constitution of the United States is very key because basically it needs to, an understanding of the Constitution needs to inform us in our choice of candidates and inform our criterion for selecting candidates. So basically, for decades, we've been electing candidates who don't respect the basic requirements of the oath of office, and basically all the candidates of the two major parties that survived the primaries do not respect the basic requirements of the oath of office. And the oath of office really relates to the character of the candidate, how he responds to it, touches on his character, and it tends to reveal something about his character. So if he's a confident person, then he'll understand the basic requirements of the oath of office. And if he's a decent person, he will want to respect that obligation, the oath of office, because it is a solemn commitment. So electing people who are confident and decent goes hand in hand with electing people whose positions are in conformity with basic constitutional principle. And this is all important.
Right. And that's something that even non-Catholics and non-Christians who want to be American can agree to and have to agree to in the sense that that's what it means. America as a state is defined by the Constitution. These are the principles by which the American people have already decided that we want to live.
Sure.
And so our laws need to reflect those principles in the Constitution. We see that being ignored and even contradicted in some of the policy suggestions that are being put forward.
Sure. But and also we need to keep in mind that when we elect people who don't have an anti-constitutional mentality, they tend to appoint, nominate, and confirm judges of that mentality. And that's what's been happening for many, many decades. And that is, with little doubt, how we got the Roe Wade decision to begin with. So pro-lifers need to realize that if they're going to really solve the problem that they're trying to solve of abortion, then they need to stop injecting poison into the organism of the federal government by electing people who have an anti-constitutional mentality. And what that also does is when we do that, it weakens the connection between the legal framework, which is designed to restrain the federal government, and the federal government itself. The federal government, it's a Leviathan organization. It has the public's basically resources to fight the public, and to let something like that go out of control is extremely dangerous, as history has already shown. So we need to push back at that and understand what we really need to do as Catholic citizens to get our government under control. And what's at stake here is also our religious freedom, as well as all the other rights that are ensconced in the Bill of Rights. So, it's kind of ironic that many of the people who are complaining about, and rightly so, that religious freedom is being undermined, are also electing people who are basically advancing that cause. And this is something that we need to get people to be aware of.
Exactly.
And there's another thing that we should point out here, too, is that we're independent media. And as independent media, we are not as restrained as some of the other media, like the advertising-driven media or other media that have ideological agenda. So you won't always, if ever, hear some of the themes that we can bring out and will bring out on this program in the major media. So that's why it's very important that we get supported and that we get listened to as well. Because to find the truth today, you're not going to find it the important truths generally. With the majority of the media, you have to look farther and deeper.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we invite our listeners now to stay tuned for the rest of this hour. We're going to talk about an ongoing effort right now, which I think exemplifies Catholic citizenship, the leadership of a Catholic attorney, Tom Harvey, who has now for the third or fourth time in the last as many years organized a signature collection drive to try to get a constitutional amendment petition on the ballot in 2020, which would be the first of a four-step process that could lead to a constitutional amendment that would end abortion, at least would end the taxpayer funding of abortion. So coming up are some excerpts from an interview that we had with Tom Harvey. And
before that, we'll be talking about the natural law, and it's one of the most important issues we can talk about. And again, when societies and individuals ignore it or clash with it in grave ways, it does grave damage to themselves and to society. So we need to learn about the natural law and be able to talk about it ourselves. It's a great tool, and it's very important for our spirituality. It has a lot of the answers to practical questions that relate to our daily lives.
Exactly. So principles and application, that's really what the show is about. Principles that are consistent with the Catholic faith and also with natural law and the Constitution. And then after discussing those principles, we'll be looking at specific situations where those principles come into play. So stay tuned, and you're listening to Catholic Citizenship.
Did you know that killing an unborn eagle is a crime, but killing an unborn baby is a constitutional right? And did you know that Massachusetts taxpayers have been subsidizing abortion for over 35 years? This is Tom Harvey from the Massachusetts Alliance to Stop Taxpayer-Funded Abortions. If you are a Catholic radio listener and seek to end these taxpayer subsidies, please help us. We have taken a first step by filing a petition to amend the state constitution. The amendment would say, "Nothing in this Constitution requires the public funding of abortion." This petition has the potential to seriously weaken the abortion industry in Massachusetts. We need to collect over 80,000 signatures by November 20. Volunteers are needed. If you would like to sign the petition or can help in gathering signatures, please contact us at stoptaxpayerabortion.org or email me, Tom Harvey, at tom@stoptaxpayerabortion.org. And please remember, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing.
So, Jonathan, now we've told our listeners what the concept is of Catholic citizenship, and we've told them a little bit about the pillars, and one of those is natural law, which you've done a bit of thinking and writing about over the course of your work in pro-life activism and then in your political work. So why don't you tell us what is natural law and why should we care about it?
Well, natural law is God's law. It's one of the two ways that God reveals his plan for us. One is through what we term divine revelation, but the other is through natural law. So basically, that term natural is actually a reference to the fact that we use natural reason to discern what the natural law is. So that's one of the common mistakes that people make about the natural law. It's basically, we don't reference what we term divine revelation in ascertaining what the natural law is. We simply use human reason, and we also draw from the evidence of nature and reason to ascertain what it is. Natural law is basically it's this: the way the Creator has arranged nature implies something about His will, and whatever is implied in the arrangement of nature about the will of the Creator is an aspect of the natural law. And everything that's implied in the arrangement of nature about the will of the Creator is the natural law in its entirety. So it's the source of natural law is the supreme legislative authority. It's the Creator. And so that means it is really a protection against legal positivism and statism. But going back, it's also...
Well, if I can just interrupt you for a second, because you've brought up some terms which I think may be not very familiar to all of our listeners, like statism, positive law, and coming back to the concept of natural law itself, is it different than the laws of nature? Is natural law and the law of nature the same thing, or is there some kind of difference? I mean, laws of nature being gravity, that's a law of nature. Is that what we mean when we're talking about natural law, or are we talking about something different?
Well, we are, and basically the phrase that the founders used in the Declaration of Independence catches the essence of what the natural law is. And they said, they referred to the laws of nature and of nature's God. And what they were saying there is that nature is systematically ordered, and it's ordered in accordance with the will of a creator. So, and that really captures the essence of it. It's very profound, because what they were saying is that the rights of citizens at that time in the colonies, and the American colonies, were being so terribly violated by the colonial power that their natural rights were being violated, essentially. And they said basically that the natural law justified the revolt against the colonial British power. So whether they were right or not, it certainly is correct to say that whenever a national state or local government does trample systematically on the natural rights of individuals, then that government is calling into question its legitimacy. And that is perennially true. And so, again, it harkens back to the point that I just made, that natural law is a bulwark against statism and legal positivism. And statism is basically the idea that anything that government does or advances is the law. And it's very similar to legal positivism, which states that which is basically the idea that any regulation that the government enforces successfully is law. And so both of those concepts are completely independent of any references to the divine will, and they're seriously flawed.
So you can have a law according to the theory of statism or the practice of statism, which doesn't actually harmonize with natural law.
Well, I mean, some people like to use the word law in that way, but it's certainly not true that that's law in the best sense. Because basically Thomas Aquinas, he gave us a definition of law, which is now restated in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it's basically that a law is an ordinance of reason promulgated for the common good by someone in a position of authority. So the implication there is a regulation has to be in accord with the common good in order to be lawful, and also it has to be basically promulgated by someone who has authority to do it. And as St. Paul said in Romans 13, all authority that exists originates with God. So basically, all lawful authority, all legislation, the authority for that always originates with God. And we're fond in this country of saying it originates with the will of the people, but actually it goes beyond the will of the people. It's all authority originates with God, and that's true of all laws. And it's certainly true of the natural law, too.
I find it interesting that you referred to the Founding Fathers and the Revolutionary War, which was to separate the colonies from the tyranny of the king, I guess was what they were saying. And they referred to natural law as the justification. So here we are in Massachusetts where that revolution began, and we're going back then over 200 years to a concept on which this country, the existence of this country is based. I mean, the justification for the creation of the United States of America, according to the original founders of the nation, was that natural law was being violated and needed to be restored. And so this was the way that they felt was the only option.
Yeah, and when you think about that, when you just step back and think about that, the whole justification for the revolution, for the founding of our country, according to the founders, was the natural law. And now virtually no one knows anything about the natural law or has any much faith in it. And that's really bizarre. It's an absurdity, but The direct reality is every American should be keenly interested in the natural law, not just for that reason, but for other reasons, because if an individual strays in grave ways against the natural law, he puts himself in jeopardy. He's harming himself, and it's also true for societies in general.
So
and that's what
really,
we have now.
Yeah, and that's really why people, I think, will, once they begin to understand what it is, see the validity of it, because whether there's a legislator, a human legislator, a state, some kind of positive authority on earth to enforce this, it doesn't need any enforcement because it flows from nature itself. So to go against natural law, the punishment is not going to come from some court. It's going to come from nature itself.
It would be great if it would come from both, because it would be good for the right ordering of society. And we as human beings do not perceive the natural law generally as we ought to. As Thomas Aquinas pointed out, that he made that point specifically and pointed out that is why our God gave us the Ten Commandments, which he said for the most part are restatements of the natural law. So we do need an outside influence sometimes to help us perceive the natural law because of our sinfulness. And we can see what has happened since the the Enlightenment, so-called, which was an anti-Christian movement. Basically, it tried to separate intellectual activity from any references to tradition or religion. It desired to separate intellectual activity from all references to religion or tradition, particularly like the Catholic faith and so on. And although most of Enlightenment thinkers retain belief in a creator, and that is something that we can actually discern from the evidence of nature and reason, so they retained belief in the creator. But nevertheless, there has increasingly developed a diversity of opinions about what the natural law required and specified. And so as time went on, people started to think that the natural law was really subjective. And there was one in the late 18th century, one of our Supreme Court justices pointed out that although there are many people who are of a sound mind and morals, in his opinion, that they still would disagree on what the natural law was, and therefore it was just subjective, which is not true. But that idea has come to dominate that it is subjective and not objective, and so the natural law has virtually no influence in our legal activity in this country and the laws of our country, even though the Bill of Rights, you can see, which was established by the first Congress and by our founding fathers, does actually reference, or it correlates very well with the natural law when you look at the right to assembly, the right to worship, and the right to, the Second Amendment, and things like that. But unfortunately, we have regressed quite a bit, and we need to recover an understanding of the natural law because it's extremely important. And it can be a great aid to us as individuals in our understanding God's plan for us in our individual lives, and also in evangelizing people, helping them to get over some of the obstacles that they have to becoming Catholic.
Well, that's actually one of the primary motives of this show is evangelization through our public witness and our interactions with other men and women in society. In other words, we're going to advocate for the natural law, and by doing so, hopefully work for the common good and also help bring people back to the original idea. And with that, Jonathan, let's take a break and then come back.
Okay.
John Henry Cardinal Newman, at the end of his essay on the grammar of assent, in which he talks about why Christianity is reasonable and the most reasonable of all religions and approaches to life, because life, it doesn't end on earth. He talks about the belief in God and how that figures into the way we approach life, because there's going to be a judgment. So I'll read this kind of verbatim, having given that little preface, and then maybe you can tie it into something that's actual. Give it a try, huh?
Give it a shot, though.
Okay. All right. So here's the conclusion, second to the or third to the last paragraph in concluding of his book. I'll try to summarize where it's hard to follow because I think the language is archaic a little bit. So I've given these arguments for Christianity. I've dwelt upon them in order to show how I would apply the principles of this essay to the proof of the divine origin of Christianity. It's addressed, Christianity that is addressed both as regards its evidences and its contents to minds which are in the normal condition of human nature, as believing in God and in a future judgment. And natural law has a connection to conscience.
Well, that's true because it is written in our hearts, and there are those natural inclinations of man, according to Thomas Aquinas, that are implanted there, and they include the inclination to see the good and to seek God, to preserve himself, to preserve the race, to live in community, and to use his intellect and will. And so it does relate to our conscience because that's a characteristic of all human beings, although those tendencies could be suppressed in individuals through sin. Still, that is always part of our universal characteristic of all human beings, those characteristics of the soul.
What I wanted to pull out of this and ask you to comment on is how an awareness of God and a concept of a final judgment, of each and every one of us, our soul, we have to somehow account for how we live our life. How does that figure into the concept of natural law? And maybe you could show how it applies to, in some way, to problems that we face today.
Well, the concept of a final judgment should give us a lot of urgency about searching for the truth, and we do that with our minds, and in day-to-day life we have to search for what is God's plan for us, what does he want us to do in practical matters, and it takes effort to discern that. Sometimes it's not always so clear immediately, but the natural law is really helpful in that. It has been something that's been discussed over the centuries and in detail, and a lot of that thinking has been done for us, and so we can know some things that are extremely important about how we should arrange human society by understanding those ideas. For example, and again, natural law, we discern what the natural law is by reflecting on the evidence of nature and on man's nature, on the nature of his environment. And so when you consider that, for example, you see that man he has to work for a living. He can't always work. For example, if you have to work in agriculture, like in primitive societies, you can only work on a seasonal basis. And so you need to be able to store up wealth for those times when you're not able to work. Also,
like the fishermen in New Bedford.
Absolutely, and or when persons get elderly or when they get ill, they have to have wealth stored up so that they can survive through those times. So that implies a need to own property. And basically, since this need arises from man's nature and the nature of his environment, it's a natural right to be able to own property. So that tells you something about, has implications. That very simple point, it implies that there's something wrong with concepts like socialism, for example. We shouldn't be basically confiscating property and under the guise of socialism.
And there's too many young people right now who are being swept up in this, just giddy enthusiasm for a concept they don't really understand, and the consequences of which they have no grasp. I mean, life in the Soviet Union for 70 years was hell on earth,
right?
By most accounts, and so this is great. I think maybe this is a good place to segue into another actual issue that we're facing, and I'm referring to this constitutional amendment petition that's going on right now. Probably as listeners are listening to this broadcast, the effort is being made. But just to reiterate what you said, natural law is reflected in this fact. If we reason upon how life actually works, man needs to have the opportunity to accumulate some wealth to get him through the hard times when he can't maybe earn an income.
Absolutely.
And so the right to own property is something that flows from nature.
Right.
Because
It's a natural
we
right.
need to live. We have a right to live, and we have a right to legitimate means to support that our life. And so owning property is one of those rights that that flows from the nature of life on earth. If we were in Eden before the fall of man, before sin came and created all this disorder, we could just walk around with fig leaves and pick fruit off the trees and be in bliss and not have to work. But that's not the reality, and it's evident to anybody who has tried to live without a job. I mean, thanks be to God, I've never been on the streets, but I'm sure there's a lot of homeless people who can tell you can't get very far without an income or with some property.
Right. And
So
I also think people need to realize that this issue of property rights being a natural right is more prescient than people realize, because if you see what's going on at the local level, even in government, and also at the federal level, property rights are not being respected, and it's having a grave impact on property owners and on our nature's legal system. But we probably don't have time to talk about that now.
Well, we're going to have hopefully many months of this broadcast to be able to dig in a little deeper. But right now, a pressing issue for the month of October and part of November, which is the window of opportunity to collect signatures for a petition that would state that there is nothing in the Constitution of the state of Massachusetts which requires the state to fund abortions. And so after the break, we're going to talk about that effort being led by an attorney by the name of Tom Harvey, who we had the pleasure to interview on our program. So,
okay, that sounds great.
Now for a break. Following in the footsteps of New York and Virginia, liberal legislators in Massachusetts have filed legislation to expand abortion on demand to include even infanticide. They call it the Act to Remove Obstacles and Expand Abortion Access, or ROE Act for short. If passed, the Extreme Abortion ROE Act would legalize infanticide, legalize back-alley abortion, remove parental consent requirements for minors, and allow abortion for any reason at all. Citizens of Massachusetts have a chance now to oppose this bad legislation before it becomes law. If you disagree with such unrestricted extreme abortion expansion in Massachusetts at your taxpayer expense, let your legislator know. Say no to Roe. Say no to infanticide. Sign the petition at saynotoroe.com. That's saynotoroe.com.
You're listening to a special Election Day broadcast of Catholic Citizenship, a program designed to help listeners understand our obligation as Catholics to faithfully fulfill our civic duties. I'm Jonathan Hill.
And I'm Father Allen. So, thank you, Tom, for being here.
Thank you for having me,
thank you.
Father.
So this is Catholic Citizenship, a new program that we're launching with Radio Cor Mariae. And the intent is to educate our listeners to what it means to be a citizen who practices his or her citizenship as a Catholic, faithful to the teaching of the Catholic Church, faithful to the gospel precept of love of God and neighbor, in the spirit of martyrdom, meaning the spirit of true witness. So, Tom, tell us what you're attempting to accomplish now politically, legally.
Sure, Father. I did some research some years ago and sort of inquiring why are we really getting nowhere in Massachusetts politically. And I came to the conclusion that one of the major factors in that regard was that there was a 1981 case, Moe versus Secretary of Administration and Finance from the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, the highest court in Massachusetts, which ruled essentially that Massachusetts tax dollars must pay for abortions for indigent women, Medicaid abortions. And this was a constitutional right according to the SJC. And what that did, in my view, was it took it away, the issue of taxpayer-funded abortions, away from the state legislature. And now there's nothing really that anybody could do about it unless they amended the state constitution, which is a difficult thing to do. So the typical person who may be upset about it, or even if the person's aware of it, couldn't go to their legislator and request a change because the legislature can't do anything. So this requires actually amending the Constitution. And how is that done? Well, there are a couple of ways, but the only way that is possibly politically feasible is this way, which is called the initiative petition. And that's a provision under the Massachusetts Constitution which lays out a essentially 4-step procedure. And the first step is getting a lot of certified signatures. The second step, it goes to the legislature, and you need to get 1/4 of them. The third step, again, goes to the next elected state legislature and get 1/4 of them. And then the fourth step, it goes on the ballot and a majority vote. So this is hard things to do at each level. It's going to be a challenge. But I think it's something it's possible. We can achieve this. And the major thing is we don't need half the legislature. That's the typical law is you need half the legislature to get something done. Here, you need just 1/4. We may not even be able to get that, but I think it's close and it's worth a shot. It's hard to predict because the legislature is always in flux. And I think it's part of the nature of a legislator not to show their hand either. So you don't know where exactly people stand. Overall, in the country, taxpayer-funded abortions are overwhelmingly unpopular. I think it's like 65%. Of course, we're not like the rest of the country here in Massachusetts, so we don't know exactly. There's been no recent polling that I'm aware of that shows where the people stand on the issue. But I think it has a chance of success here because first we have people that are opposed to abortion, and second we have people that are opposed to their tax dollars going for abortion. So it's both a social and fiscal issue. So in that regard, I think we have a shot at success here. And I think once that barrier is removed, right now it is a barrier because right now if Roe versus Wade gets overturned, it have no effect at all in Massachusetts because of this ruling under the state constitution. That 1981 ruling also said that under the state constitution, abortion was a fundamental right, and it must be paid for by the taxpayer, as I mentioned before. So because those are rights under the state constitution, whatever is determined federally is not going to affect us here. That is, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, we're in the same boat as we are right now. Right. So the proposed language of the Constitution is nothing in this Constitution requires the public funding of abortion.
Tom, for our viewers and listeners, who is involved in the actual on-the-street effort to get these petitions?
Just volunteers. We are out, and we think that we're getting a lot more volunteers than other years. We had a lot of volunteers, but just, to collect 57,000 signatures, you need a lot of volunteers, and we did. But we think we're going to have more this time, one, because more people have heard of it, and two, people are upset about the Infanticide Roe Act, and that's got some people activated that otherwise wouldn't be. So.
Sure.
How many collectors are you hoping to get?
Well,
do you have a target number?
The goal is 1,000 volunteers to get 100 signatures each at a minimum. Mm-hmm. Now, I think we can get the 100, but it's the 1,000 that's
1,000 volunteers.
We've got about on my own email list. This doesn't include Renew Mass Coalition. I have like 1,200 people. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're all not going to be activists, but I am getting the word out. We are having some pretty good turnouts at these trainings. Some not so good, but some really good. And we're encouraging people to get their friends to join them.
Have you thought of tapping into the networks of conservative candidates, if there are any around here? Maybe they have volunteer networks that could.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Renew Mass Coalition is sort of the political people, so they got a lot of avenues and contacts. Mm-hmm. So they probably have already done that. Wouldn't surprise me.
What about young people? Do you have any young volunteers? Here in the diocese, we have every year, thanks be to the pro-life ministry for organizing a pro-life boot camp. So you get kids from the ages probably of 14 to 20 or so. There's the older ones volunteer to help run the boot camp. But have they been involved in any way? Do you know? And what would you say to a young person to encourage them?
Well, I think it'd be a good way to get active in the political arena. This is a good start. We do have students for life that are going to join us this time around. Abigail Young. She's got a lot of contacts. So we are hoping, and Mass Citizens for Life will be joining us. I think they have contacts.
They
with
will
youth.
be.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So that's great news.
Yes. Yeah.
So two big organizations, pro-life organizations, Massachusetts Citizens for Life.
And
they're
Renew
gonna
Mass Coalition. That's right.
And Renew Mass Coalition and Students for Life.
Yes.
Now, Students for Life is active on most college campuses,
Yes.
or do they have any high school
The
branches?
problem
as
with
well?
colleges is a lot of these people aren't citizens of Massachusetts, as far as, but they can collect, but they can't sign,
Okay.
And there's no age, there's no minimum age limit as far as collecting. A 14-year-old can collect signatures.
Okay.
This is was a really good point that you made before, that this is a way that people can get involved in the political process. They've never done anything like this before, especially young people. They can get out there and you learn how to meet and greet people, and you build up your confidence doing this stuff. And you eventually realize that you can do more than you initially thought you could do. And signature gathering relates to campaigns as well. So if you're involved in this type of campaign, you can be involved in a candidate campaign.
Sure.
And the way that we're often outnumbered, often we don't have the dollars. The good candidates don't have the financial means that some of the other candidates have, but we can often make up for that with volunteers. So there's a lot of latent strength out there of people that are not participating. If they would realize that they can do something and get involved, they can actually make a huge difference. We can start tipping the balance here in Massachusetts.
Yes.
In Massachusetts, if people will do that. So
Well, that's a good point. I think that's one of the reasons I'm doing this is, okay, we may lose, but we're activating people.
Yeah.
And we're forming, lists and political bases so that,
right.
okay, we'll find out, how did that legislator vote on this? Okay,
Right.
he's in a vulnerable district, and let's hold his feet to the fire on this. So that type of thing. And one of the keys is changing the legislature. We're trying to get a quarter to vote our way. Well, someday maybe it'll be easier to get a half. That's that's the goal.
Right. So one of the things that it seems to me that listeners should understand, though, about this project is that it's not just about correcting a particular instance of judicial activism here in Massachusetts that opened the spigot of state-funded abortions, but it's also preparatory of the possibility that Roe v. Wade could be overturned at the federal level. And what you're doing could actually free up the legislature to restrict abortion if that happens. Whereas if you don't do this, then the SJC may use its precedent to prevent the legislature from doing anything.
Well, that's true in a sense, but I think the SJC doesn't have to do anything, because right now the status quo is it's a constitutional right to have Medicaid abortions in Massachusetts. And if we don't do something, nothing's going to change. That's the way it's always going to be. So we've got to take action. You can't just say, well, we're eventually going to be pro-life. It won't. We have no choice but to amend the state constitution if you don't like this current scenario.
I have a question. It's something I'm not understanding in the logic of the way things are being done. You said that even if the Supreme Court of the United States overturns the Roe versus Wade decision, that won't have any effect at all in Massachusetts. So why are some legislators in Massachusetts insistent on this extreme abortion law that would include infanticide if the current law doesn't, no matter what happens at the federal level, Massachusetts, until your proposal should eventually be accepted, unless that happens, there is no effect to overturning Roe versus Wade in Massachusetts. So why are they pushing this Roe
Because
Act?
they think they can do it. It's totally unnecessary. They're in the driver's seat right now. They think they can get this, law passed, but it's just political posturing as far as, Roe might be overturned and we're going to be in big trouble here in Massachusetts. It's not. I mean, as far as the so-called trouble, they're all set here under the state constitution. I think they can maybe raise some money by making a big deal about it and, currying favor with the Planned Parenthood types.
So, Tom, is there anything that you would like the listeners to know regarding the effort that you're promoting right now?
I think we need volunteers. We're not going to get this done unless we have a lot of volunteers. And if they're interested in volunteering, they can contact me at tom@stoptaxpayerabortion.org is my email address, or the website is www.rtaabortion.org. stoptaxpayerabortion.org.
And we can put those on the website
Great.
and make that known. Do you have a volunteer coordinator? Somebody who's helping you gather these volunteers?
Well, yeah.
recruit?
So far we've had like these regional coordinators, and down in this way it's Steve Frazzetti.
Steve Frazzetti. I've heard his name. He was involved last time too,
Yes,
wasn't
that's
he?
right. That's right.
Okay. So we can get his number and make that available to
Yeah.
listeners, to viewers who want to get involved.
Can I ask you how much progress have you made in getting the volunteers at this point that you need? Because the reason I asked that, I know once I got involved in a campaign, someone asked me to, and I sort of delayed. Yeah. Then I went to a meeting and I saw how few people there were there, and then I said, "Oh my!" I was shocked. So I immediately got super active and I started going from state to state collecting signatures for this candidate.
Wow.
And so sometimes if people know how serious the situation is, they will get more active.
Well, I don't. It's hard to have a number because you don't know what people are thinking. They can't make a meeting. Does that mean they're going to go out there and collect?
Right.
But we had, I went out to Leominster. I think we had like 18 volunteers at a meeting.
Oh, that's good.
Then I heard,
That's very
I
good.
heard we had, about 12 or something out in Leicester.
Not bad.
Then we only had 2 at, I think it was Westboro. So, I know the last time, we actually have a training tonight in Woburn. And last time around, Woburn had like about 30. So expecting a big turnout. And then you have people that, they know how to do it. They don't need to show up to these training sessions. Or at
Right.
least that's what they believe. So,
Right.
they're going to be great volunteers, but they don't want to be coming where, they've heard the same song and dance. So
Right. And you don't know what kind of commitment you're going to get.
that's right.
And there may be those people out there who don't even show their face and are out there collecting
Yes.
signatures. I know some like that.
It's really, after a while, if you get doing this stuff, and you're talking with people, and it can be fun, actually. You can actually enjoy it, even though it's work, but
Yeah.
you can enjoy it. So I think people need to realize that this is really, not only is it a really good thing, you can enjoy it, and you'll feel good about it afterwards because you're doing something really important here.
And it's more enjoyable in early September than it is in late November.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So last time around, the churches, the Catholic bishops kind of came out with a statement long before the petitions
Yeah.
started to be gathered, and they said, "Oh, not on church property."
Yes.
Then there was a great deal of pushback from the pro-life community, particularly, and Cardinal O'Malley reversed his decision, and then so did the Bishop McManus of Worcester.
That's correct.
So is the way clear then still in the Archdiocese of Boston and in the Diocese of Worcester at least, is the way clear to gather signatures?
As far as we know, that was the the changed policy, and that we can collect. Yes, that's what we're going on at this point.
And then as far as Fall River and what is the other?
Fall River and Springfield,
Springfield.
the bishops never retracted the policy, and so as far as we know, that's still in force. Yeah.
Okay, so if a listener happens to be in the Diocese of Springfield or in Fall River and wants to try to gather petitions at their parish, they would have to contact the bishops of those dioceses and say, "Can I do it?" Or at least talk to the pastor
or
of the
technically
church.
you could do it on a public sidewalk in front of the church, but you'd rather have the church's support, the
Sure,
pastor's support,
clearly,
obviously.
hopefully.
But legally you can do it on a public sidewalk. You don't need the
Permission,
okay, but
right?
we prefer to get the permission.
Get the blessing, yeah,
Yes.
and the encouragement
Yes,
from the pastor. Go
yeah.
out and sign this thing, please.
It makes a huge difference if the pastor
Right.
encourages people to sign or doesn't, or stays
Sure.
silent on it.
Well, pastors are not elected, so you can't affect how they're going to. Well, you can, and we should, by prayer, by education, by advocacy, in any case, and giving witness. Tom, any closing thoughts?
Just that we need help. It takes a lot of volunteers to collect those 80,000 signatures. So if if you're pro-life and you think there's really not much you can do other than prayer, well, you can do something. Here's something that could make a difference. So I just personally myself, over the years, I've attended a lot of meetings and taken bus trips and everything else. And at the end, I'd say, did I really advance the cause here? Am I actually saving the lives of babies? Not really. Okay, we get people fired up, but to do what? So now here, you can get fired up to do this. We can collect signatures and make some progress in the pro-life cause in Massachusetts.
Absolutely, and I think every effort, whether evidently or is successful, or even if it's not, I think the fact that the effort is made already has an effect. And somebody who last time around, let's say at Market Basket, had an opportunity to sign and was just either too much in a hurry or embarrassed to be seen signing it, maybe this time around, maybe their conscience will prick them and says, you had an opportunity, you blew it last time, now's your chance, show that you're a Christian, sign a righteous proposition, a petition here that's going to actually uphold life that God, our Creator, made. God is not in favor of one single abortion ever, procured abortion. So,
one thing I often say is it just the current state of the law. It's a crime to kill an unborn eagle, and it's a constitutional right to kill an unborn human being. How ridiculous is that?
Yeah.
Here's a chance to help the most helpless and vulnerable member of the human family right here. So there's really no excuse. We're obligated to do something, and we should do it.
And I'd like to thank Tom for being a leader in this, and I hope that a lot of people are going to come forward and be inspired, and just hope this thing really takes off. It really needs to.
Absolutely. And so we just encourage all of our listeners and viewers to be encouraged to see that it is possible to have an effect, and it is an obligation of our Christian faith to make that faith visible and consequential to our life and our actions in public. There's a lot of fear involved with why people don't give witness as often or as openly as they could. There's fear, there's insecurity about one's own ability to take some leadership. But God supplies with grace those who are willing to step forward and be witnesses. And, we look at the martyrs. I think I'm very often inspired to look at history and look at the saints and see, those who are willing to face up to the worst hostilities, to do what's right and to give witness to the truth. So we hope that all of our listeners appreciate that, and will pray to have that courage. If they lack courage, to pray to have courage. If they lack generosity, to pray to have more generosity. But we all are in need of grace in order to be the Christians that Christ wants us to be. So maybe we can close with a prayer then. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We give you thanks, Almighty God, for this time of conversation, education, formation, to be Christians in the world, the light of the world, the salt of the earth that Jesus calls us to be. We thank you for the work that you're doing through Tom Harvey and those who are united with him in this effort to get this righteous constitutional amendment petition on the ballot. And we ask you to move hearts, to soften those hearts that are unwilling to hear your word and unwilling to receive your mercy and your love. We ask you to convert hearts and to embolden your servants. We ask this through the intercession of your mother, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, Tom.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Father.
Thanks,
Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Catholic Citizenship, a program designed to help listeners understand our obligation as Catholics to faithfully fulfill our civic duties. I'm Jonathan Hill.
And I'm Father Allen. For the full interview with Tom Harvey and other materials related to Catholic citizenship and this radio program, please visit our website, wpmw.org.
We now return to our regular EWTN Radio Cor Mariae schedule. Ave Maria.